Moving along here on One, New York's longest running sports call-in show, Jackson Heil, Nick DeLuca, and talking Knicks and Nets. And for that, we bring in a very special guest, New York Daily News Knicks reporter, Stefan Bondy. Stefan, thanks for taking the time with us today. How's everything going?
I'm good. Thanks for having me.
So let's get right into it. Obviously, the draft is always a big topic of conversation for the Knicks, especially recently. And with that, Obi Toppin falls to them at number 8. What do you make of the pick, and what do you make of Leon Rose's first draft in New York?
Well, I was a little bit surprised that, like you said, he fell to 8. I projected him in the top 5, and I was surprised that he got that low. I think the Knicks really wanted him. In fact, they considered trading up to get him. There were some discussions with Cleveland, who had the 5 pick, about moving up. So they were so happy to get him at 8 because they thought they had to get up earlier. They didn't have to trade up to get him. So I like the pick. I think he's more of a ready-made player than a lot of people in the draft. He's certainly older. He was the National College Player of the Year. Some people are concerned about his defense, and that's something he has to work on, especially when you play for Coach Tom Thibodeau. But I do like the pick, and I think he's going to be an electric type player, a player that fans can really get excited about.
Stefan, you mentioned the Knicks coveted Toppin at the top of this draft. How do you feel the fit will be with some of the other pieces that the Knicks have with, say, R.J. Barrett and Julius Randle? They bring in Austin Rivers. What is the fit going to look like with Toppin in the fold?
Well, there is a concern about what you're going to do with Toppin and Julius Randle. I mean, they play the same position, and they have similar style games. I think Toppin's more explosive, more pick and roll type of player, but you're going to have problems playing those two guys on the floor at the same time. So, listen, Julius Randle was never the long-term solution at power forward, but Tom Thibodeau is a win-now coach. So my guess is he's going to try to play Julius Randle in the beginning because, Julius Randle's been around for a long time. He's more of a polished player than Obi Toppin because Tom Thibodeau's going to want to win right away. But I think in order to get Obi Toppin the minutes that you want to get him in a rebuilding season as a rookie player and a top rookie player, you got to figure out something with Julius Randle. And I think at some point, whether it's at the trade deadline or before, they're going to figure out if they can deal Julius Randle because he represents not only kind of a block to Obi Toppin, but also his contract. If they were to acquire a star and they're in the market to get in a disgruntled star, you have to match salaries, and Julius Randle's making $18 million a year. So I wouldn't be surprised if they move on from Julius Randle. I think they didn't solve their problem at point guard in the offseason, and that's still a concern. I know they drafted Emmanuel quickly, but he's more of a 2, I think. I think at this point, Frank Ntilikina is more of a 2. So really they have Austin Rivers, who is, I like Austin Rivers. I think he's a polished player. I think he has a lot of experience. I think he brings some leadership to the table, but he's not your long-term solution at point guard. Dennis Smith Jr. has a lot to prove, and they're bringing back Elfrid Payton on a 1-year deal. So out of those 3, I don't see the long-term solution at point guard, and I think they need to get somebody who's young and able to get to the rim and shoot the three-pointer, and they didn't find that person this offseason.
Stefan, I thought you brought up a really interesting point with Tom Thibodeau being a win-now coach in a lose-now situation, and you wrote an article about that recently. I want to ask about the direction that Leon Rose took with that. Do you think that he sees something else in Tom Thibodeau, or is this more of a plan for Leon Rose to say, hey, maybe just throw this year, but we're coming soon to compete within the next 1 or 2 years?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know that Leon Rose had a plan that carried out his original plan. I think they were trying to upgrade this roster. And what happened is a couple things. They weren't, players weren't as eager to play in New York as they thought they might be. And number 2 is the prices for some of these free agents like Gordon Hayward just reached an astronomical level. So they weren't willing, and I understand why. You don't want to pay 4 years, $120 million for Gordon Hayward coming off the last couple seasons that he's had in that big-time injury. So I understand, but I think they wanted to upgrade the roster more than they did. And I know Tom Thibodeau, I've heard he was pushing for win-now moves, and it's hard to you can't really overestimate how bad this roster is now. I think they might be the worst roster in the NBA in terms of talent. So it's going to be really tough for Tom Thibodeau, and don't forget this, Tom Thibodeau, when he took over Chicago, I mean, they won over 60 games in his first year. When he went to Minnesota, they were a bad team. They had a bad year. And what did he do? He said, I can't do this anymore. I'm going to trade 3 lottery picks for Jimmy Butler for a win now situation. So that's how he's wired. And it's going to be interesting to see how he deals with this situation, because like I said, at this point, this roster is really lacking talent. And, Tom Thibodeau is a good development coach. He's shown that in the past, but he's also a winning coach, and he gets frustrated by losing, and it's going to be interesting to see what he can do with this roster.
You mentioned that the Knicks potentially have the worst roster in the NBA. You don't think that there's any possibility of them showing significant improvement, potentially with a play-in tournament, making a playoff run this year?
Not based on the talent now. I mean, listen, the Russell Westbrook is still out there as a trade possibility before the deadline, and Victor Oladipo still out there as a possibility for a trade. But if you look at this roster right now, I don't see how they can make the playoffs. Sorry, Knicks fans. It's just my honest assessment of what I see. I don't really see how much beyond. I think they upgraded a coach because Tom Thibodeau is a really good coach. And I think Obi Toppin will, he's going to take some time to develop, but I don't really see how they upgraded the roster that much from last season.
Yeah, I don't think you're surprising too many Knicks fans with that one. Speaking with Stefan Bondy of the New York Post. And Stefan, I think one of the big things that will be monitored.
Of the New York Daily News.
Oh, New York Daily News. Apologies. That one completely slipped. My fault. Anyway, Stefan Bondy of the New York Daily News. And one of the big things I think Tom Thibodeau will be monitored on in his first 2 years is the progression of R.J. Barrett and Obi Toppin, of course, but specifically R.J. Barrett, who the Knicks took at number 3 in 2019. What do you make of R.J. Barrett after year one, and has your opinion on his ceiling changed after seeing him in his first crack in the NBA?
I think last year heading into the season, we thought of him as kind of this potential all-star, maybe a potential superstar. And I think that ceiling has dropped a little bit. Now, I'm not going to go crazy. He didn't make either of the all-rookie teams, which, is a problem for somebody who was picked 3rd overall and played as much as he did. But I still think basically the projection is almost the same. I think if he builds a jump shot, which was a problem, and we knew that was a problem when he was drafted, if he gets a consistent three-pointer and he gets a consistent jump shot, that's as high as his ceiling is. Right now, he does not have that. He didn't show that last season, but people look at his form, they think it'll be fine. Maybe it just requires repetition. Maybe it requires something else. But I think that's the key. Now, one thing he did impress me, of 2 ways he impressed me last season. Defensively, he gets after it. I mean, he's a dog. Like he and that, defense is about motor a lot of the times. That's about 80% of it, motor and effort and all that stuff. And he has that. And he has that drive to win. I see that in him. And he has that drive to play, and he's durable and he's strong. So he has the body and the mentality of a player that you want. It's just a matter of, like I said, developing that jump shot, which was really missing from his game.
We're talking about some of the young players that the Knicks have on their roster. Into the fold after the draft is Miles Powell. They sign him. He goes undrafted. A lot of pundits around the NBA thinking that's a pretty good signing, that Powell was a surprise to go undrafted and may make an impact. What did you make of the signing of Miles Powell post-draft?
I mean, they're signing him on Exhibit 10 contract, so he's probably going to be in the G League. I don't think he's gonna make much of an impact on the Knicks next season. They had two-way contracts open, and they used them on different players, so that shows kind of what they think of him. They signed Jared Harper and Theo Pinson instead. I don't know. I think Miles Powell is, he showed some people some good things locally and in the Big East, but I don't think he's projected as making much of an impact on the Knicks.
Stefan Bondy of the New York Daily News joins us on One-on-One. Stefan, let's shift over to the other side of town in Brooklyn, and the big talk there, the search for a 3rd star for Kevin Durant, Kyrie Irving. I want to put you on the spot here. There's 2 big ones who I think are maybe going to be that third guy, Bradley Beal being one of them and James Harden being the other one out of Houston. Who would you say is the best fit for Brooklyn out of those two?
Now, obviously, Harden is a better player, but I really struggle with this idea of bringing Harden to a team with Kyrie Irving and Kevin Durant because, you know, as it's been said before, and it's true, there's only one ball. And Harden, he commands it 80% of the time, and I don't know how you can fit a Kyrie Irving and a Kevin Durant next to him. I'm sure they can make it work. They're so talented, but there are issues there with how they're going to divvy up the ball, and the other issue is defensively. I don't think Harden has shown over the years. Sometimes he doesn't care too much about defense, and Kyrie Irving sometimes feels the same way. Now, Kevin Durant was a great defender, but he's coming off an Achilles injury. I think Bradley Beal is obviously not as good a player, but he is a better fit. I think he'll be expensive. I think that the Washington Wizards are coming into the season hoping to keep him beyond this season, and they have him locked up on a deal. Now, the John Wall situation needs monitoring because John Wall, according to reports, he wants to get out of Washington. And I think a big reason why Bradley Beal wanted to stay was to give it one more go with John Wall. So if John Wall's out of the picture, that kind of puts the pressure on Washington to deal Bradley Beal. And I think he's a better fit for the Nets right now.
The Nets are in a position where you have Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving. If they're able to get that third star, you feel like they're already in the top of the East potential NBA championship contender conversation right now without it. If they're able to get a Bradley Beal, a James Harden, are they the favorite to win the NBA championship this year?
That's tough. I mean, the championship, no, I don't think they're better than the Lakers. I don't think they're better than the Clippers. It usually, when you look at like the formation of these super teams, right? It usually takes a year before they really get it together and start clicking and show that they can do what they can do. You remember the Miami Heat when they got LeBron James and Dwayne Wade and Chris Bosh, they lost that first year. And then by the second year, they got their timing together. They got their rhythm together. They got their cohesiveness together. And that's when they really became the juggernaut powerhouse that we thought they were going to be in year one. So I don't automatically put them, just because of formation of stars, I don't automatically put them as a title contender. I think it takes time. And with this situation, it's even more difficult. You're having a training camp that's going to start in about a week, and it's shortened, and they're only going to have 2 preseason games, and then the schedule's condensed. It's a really difficult situation to take a new team with a new coach and a new system and say, you know what, let's get it all together in year one. So I wouldn't automatically put them as a title contender. I think teams that have been together for a long time really have the advantage in this upcoming season. But obviously the talent is really good and spectacular. You have Kevin Durant, one of the best players of all time, and he's coming off a devastating injury, so that requires monitoring as well. But I think if you add a third star, you're saying they're the favorite in the East.
Stefan, we talked about the third star in Brooklyn. Let's mention 2 guys that have uncertain futures right now, and Spencer Dinwiddie and Karis LeVert, 2 guys who, if the Nets were to acquire a third star, you would have to think would be going the other way. Do you think those 2 specifically, obviously it could be one or the other, are better served in going the other way in a trade for Brooklyn, or do you think that they should keep them around as guys who are significant contributors to what would be a very deep Brooklyn roster?
Well, if you're going to get a star, you got to trade one of them at least. I mean, you have to understand, like, the other team's going to want something. Yep. And I think Karis LeVert is the player that most teams covet in a trade situation. And I do think that there's some overlap between the two. Like, they're both ball dominant guards. And I, probably best suited coming off the bench on this team. And I don't think you really need both of them. I mean, it's good to have talent on your roster, but I don't think you need both of them. And I think one of them, Spencer Dinwiddie, if they don't trade for a third star, I think they're going to go for something else, maybe a 4. And I think Spencer Dinwiddie is a candidate to be shipped out regardless of whether or not they're going to get that third star. They're just going to go kind of go around the edges and get complementary pieces.
I wanted to ask you, Stefan, about Steve Nash and getting his first shot here with the Nets. And of course, things are made easier by walking into a situation where you have Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving at your disposal. But he's put together an experienced staff. He's going to get some help from Mike D'Antoni and Amari Stoudemire and a familiar face as well. What are the expectations? What can we expect to see from Steve Nash in his coaching debut with the Nets?
I think he's going to lean a lot on Mike D'Antoni, and I think they're going to try to establish that kind of 7 seconds or less system that they had in Phoenix, really up and down, scoring a bunch of points. I think that's the goal right there. I've heard a lot about Steve Nash as a personality. I think he's humble enough for this job. That was part of the problem with Jason. But it was kind of a similar situation. He was just coming off his playing career. He never had a coaching job before, and he came in. He was coaching a bunch of stars, and what got in his way, certainly in the beginning, was his ego. Remember, he had an assistant coach, Lawrence Frank, who he hired to really lean on, and then it became, well, you're kind of overstepping your bounds, and then he fired Lawrence Frank very early in the season. I don't think that Steve Nash is the kind of personality to get jealous, to get insecure about something like that, and I think he'll work better with his assistant coaching staff. I don't know, though. I mean, you never really know about a coach, how good he is, how he's going to handle game situations until you see it happen. Now, obviously, he's a brilliant player, and that should translate to some degree to the sidelines, but it doesn't always. I mean, Magic Johnson was a brilliant player. He tried coaching, and it was a disaster. So we'll see what happens, but everything I've heard about Steve Nash as a person and as a personality, I think bodes well for them.
Excellent insight, as always, from Stefan Bondy of the New York Daily News. Not the New York Post, as I accidentally said before, but Stefan.
Say that. That's the one thing you could not say.
And I managed to do it, unfortunately. But Stefan, thank you so much for taking the time. I really appreciate it. Hope you had a happy Thanksgiving, and best of luck with everything going forward, and stay healthy.
Thanks a lot, Powell.